You're listening to a podcast by the Center for Action and Contemplation. To learn more, visit cac.org.
Greetings. I'm Jim Finley.
And I'm Kirsten Oates.
Welcome to Turning to the Mystics.
Welcome, everyone, to Season 8 of Turning to the Mystics. And Jim and I are here together, and we're very excited to introduce you to our new mystic for Season 8. So welcome, Jim.
Yes, welcome, yes. Good to be back together again. It's good.
So I think you've already announced our new mystic in a previous season, but I'll let you introduce her.
Yes, I'll begin by saying that we're kind of entering a new phase in this series of reflections on these different mystics, because up till now, each of the mystics we've explored have been mystics that have been very much a part of my life since I was in the monastery. I was introduced to them there. I've been reading them over the years, given retreats on them many times. So now we're beginning mystics that I've been very aware of for a long time, but haven't really sat with in that extended way. So with Mechthild, my contemplative prayer group at St. Monica's, we'd meet twice a month, and I would give a half-hour talk on one of the mystics. Then we would do an hour of sitting and walking meditation. And so I spent a year with Mechthild. And so I spent a year with her, and in preparing for this podcast, I've been getting re-immersed back in her again. So I'm kind of on a learning curve also with her, getting back into the subtleties of her guidance that she gives us. So with that said, we'll begin as usual with what we know of her, who she was historically, to help us understand and appreciate better who she is spiritually. Is that Mechthild was born in Germany around the year 1207, where she lived until her death, till around 1282, or possibly as late as 1294. The two main sources that we know about her life is that we know that she was a Beguine. And so by understanding the Beguines, we can understand a lot about her, because it helps us understand the life that she lived. So the Beguines was a spiritual renewal movement in Germany of women. There were also men that called Begards, but the women, they lived in community, and they committed their life to seeking God and a heartfelt devotional sincerity of Christ-like discipleship. So it was a spiritual renewal movement of women within the Christian church in Germany. And what's different about them is that they didn't live in monasteries. They lived in communities in the world. And also what's different is they didn't belong to a religious order. So they didn't take vows. So they weren't Franciscans or Dominicans or whatever. So they weren't under a religious superior within a community. And so these were lay women living in community in the world. They were also very open. If they felt God was calling them to, they could leave and get married if they wanted to, and have children and so on, whatever they felt God's will was. And they made their living. They were self-supporting, so they were seamstresses, or they did house cleaning. They helped prepare the dead for burial. They did different services, and this was their life, really. And so really it's a deep commitment in the world to Christ and to transformation. And in this sense, it kind of echoes Center for Action and Contemplation. In the Center for Action and Contemplation, we don't live together in community, but because of cyberspace, we're connected as a spiritual renewal within the Christian tradition. And also on these podcasts, we're like the Beguines. And that all over the world, we're sharing this communal awakening and how we can help each other get closer to God and share it with the world. The second thing we know about her is the book that she wrote. She wrote one book, and she spent her whole life writing it. As a matter of fact, this book called The Flowing Light of the Godhead, she wrote through her whole life on up to old age and dying. She wrote it while she was dying. Matter of fact, in old age, at the last two books, it's very touching because she was living in this community with Cistercian nuns, and she became blind. She couldn't feed herself, couldn't clothe herself, and she lost all sense of God's presence. in life. And she dictated the last 2 books. So she comes full circle, being at peace in this utter poverty, and then died that way. So she's kind of an extraordinary person in that way, I think. So when we're turning to Mechthild for guidance, we're turning to the guidance she offers in The Flowing Light of the Godhead, her book. And also what we know about her life, just the way that she lives. She's mentoring us or modeling for us this Christ-like life. Another interesting thing about Mechthild to be aware of is, Teresa of Avila and St. John of the Cross, the cloud of unknowing. They share this they're these awakened, mystically awakened Christians. And then they try to offer guidance to help us to discern our awakening, like how to recognize it starting, how to conduct ourselves, and so on. She doesn't do that. She's very much like Julian of Norwich that way. Notice Julian doesn't do any of that either. So Mechthild's teaching, actually very much like Julian's, is that what she does, she shares this deepening love between her and God. But she doesn't share it by talking about it, but she lets us in on it with the language of intimacy and bears witness. So as we read it, insofar as we're touched by the beauty of what she's saying about this deepening of this love, we're being guided by her. Because the very fact we're touched by it, when we hear its beauty, she reveals that we're also being drawn into this love, where we wouldn't be touched by it. And that's how she guides us, I think. That's the intimacy of her teaching.
Jim, can you tell us about when she was first spiritually awakened? Like what led her on this path?
Yeah, she does it. What she tells us is the awakening occurred when she was 12 years old, where she said she was greeted by the Holy Spirit. But unlike Julian, who gives a detailed account of her awakening, and where she was near death and the crucifix, she doesn't tell us what that was. But by the sheer beauty of her words, we get a sense of what it was. So she says, so her mystical quickening. And I think that's the way with us too. Sometimes when very young, when we look back, the first stirrings of these tastes of oneness or God's presence, it happens when it happens. But sometimes it happens when we're quite young. And we learn to grow in being faithful to it over the years. So that's what we know of her teaching.
I wonder how old she would have been when she joined the Beguine community.
Oh, we don't know. That's a good question. I don't know how old she would have been.
Quite young. So she had the mystical awakening. We know she had a kind of this big mystical awakening at 12 years old that led her to this life of joining the Beguines and wanting to write this book.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the whole book and her whole life is the deepening of that one awakening.
Oh, okay. Yes.
So she was touched, and also it's foreshadowed that she is being drawn to it, to the awakening through all of eternity. And in other words, she's saying it's just like us. We're touched, and we learn in wavering ways to be true to it. But the truth to the love of which she speaks and we sit with is eternal. And she's speaking of the eternality of this love bond that begins now when we're still on earth. Another thing about Mechthild, she can be kind of intimidating in the sense of, all the mystics, I guess, can be intimidating, but she speaks of this awakening of this love. And as we read it, it may be way beyond anything we've ever experienced. We may say, I never, and also, as we read her, probably way beyond anything we're likely to experience. Like this woman's out there like this. And so, and therefore, what's her relevance for that? I think this is important. And to me, this is what helps me to see it. Is something we've said before in previous mystics. In the Tao Te Ching, the flowing light of the Tao, which is really like the flowing light of the Godhead, like the flowing divinity through all of life. He says, the Tao is like water. It seeks the lowest places to give life to all that lives. And so the flowing of God's love is infinite. So it's infinitely pouring out the infinity of itself, all as to the point that it infinitely gives itself away as the very lowest point at which we even begin to realize it. So we live in incremental realizations of infinite generosity. So the very first increments are true, they're very limited, but it's a limited perception of infinity. Another example that I have, when a child delights in something, we don't make fun of them because of how simplistic they are. We don't laugh at them, or what do they know? To the contrary, in their delight, they delight us. See? And they delight us because God's the infinity of delight. So she takes us where we are and reminds us that it's boundaryless in all directions, in the sincere simplicity of it. And that's always helped me understand her when I got all these mystics. I see them that way too. I think it's an encouraging way to see it. Other than there's some place I'm trying to get to, I wonder if I'll ever get to before I get started. It's already unexplainably begun, by your desire to open your heart to the mystery that's awakened you. So that kind of is ribboned all through her teachings, I think. I'd now like to share some opening words of the book 1 of The Flowing Light of the Godhead, so you can kind of see how she talks. And I'd like to comment on it, kind of give a sense of what we'll be doing here. These are her opening words. This book I hereby send as a messenger to all religious people, both bad and good. For if the pillars fall, the building cannot remain standing, and it signifies me alone, and proclaims in praiseworthy fashion my intimacy. All who wish to understand this book should read it 9 times. That's how she starts. Now here's what's stunning about Mechthild. When she says, this book I hereby send as a messenger to all religious people, both good and bad and good. But the pillars fall, the building cannot remain standing, and it signifies me alone. The me is not Mechthild, it's God. In other words, she feels very free to speak as God, because she senses that God has been so opened her up, that God uses her as a conduit for God to speak through. Like she's speaking with, she has that confidence about her. And I'd like to give an example of this too, where I think she can help us get in touch with this. Say you're with somebody, someone you care about a lot, and they're really struggling with something, overwhelming to them. And you say something to them out of your sincere love for them, and what you say helps. And you don't know how you knew how to say that. That's the point, like this. And likewise, I think too, poets and artists, they kind of get started, but when it catches fire and it starts rolling out, the poet doesn't know how he or she knew how to say those words because they were flowing through her. When the beauty comes out in colors for an artist, they don't know how they knew to do that. So, and that voice that speaks to us at that time is God. See, that God, we're all conduits of God. And so she's trying to help us calibrate our hearts to be sensitive to this conduit, like this flow that's flowing through all of us in these different ways. And I think that's a helpful way to understand her as she tries to help us understand ourselves, like this. And when she says this too, she says, for if the pillars fall, the building cannot remain standing. And what are the pillars? The pillars are this love. See? That as long as we're basing on structures, and I think I'll ever get there, what do I understand, and what do I understand, and what do I agree with? The pillars it's falling. The building is falling. But when we realize we're being sustained by the upwelling of this love, this flowing through us and as us, carrying us through our days, it stands in that love. I think that's an important, subtle point for her when she says that. And she says, Lord God, who made this book? So now she's her talking to God. I made it in my powerlessness, for I cannot restrain myself as to my gifts. In other words, what she's revealing to us is that God's the one who made the book. Like a faithful scribe, she's taking dictation from God. And God wrote it in God's powerlessness to do anything less than completely giving the infinity of God away to us as the beloved in our wayward ways. I can't help. I freely chose not to be able to help myself. See? to give myself to you in your confusion and your loss and so on, which she sees as the heart of the gospel. The good news is that the flowing in of the deep. So the deep acceptance of our utter poverty is the portal through which the love of God flows into us and carries us out beyond ourselves into this love like this. And this kind of intermingling of poverty and love and generosity. I would say something else about her, too, is that in a way, then, she's playing a violin with just one string on it, which is love. But the more you listen to it, it's the beauty of the whole orchestra. See, it's a beauty that permeates the reverberations of all the various aspects of this. So even though she just stays on point, that she never leaves this love, she makes these stunning statements about love. Just like, where did that come from? Seriously. So when we sit with her, we learn these endless variations are unfolding in us. And it's endlessly evocative. And she helps us to be sensitized to surrendering ourselves over to that flow. So what she says in this later book, which we'll look at in one of the later talks, she says that where God says to her that the way he puts it to her, is that he's so freely chosen to be so hopelessly in love with her. He quite honestly doesn't know if he could handle being God without her. And she says, take me home with you, I'll be your physician forever. And the power of that is, as we're reading that, we know that it's true of us. That God is so freely chosen to be so hopelessly in love with us, God doesn't know if God can handle being God without us in our brokenness. See? And she says, take me home with you, I'll be your physician forever. It circulates back around. See? And we give back to God the gift that God longs for, which is us. Sometimes I used to put it, what if we die and we're facing God and we say, I used to listen to the Turning to the Mystics podcast. We're trying to see what we could say to get in. See? And God listens and I read the scriptures. But what if God's not interested in our spirituality? What if God's interested in us? See? And so God says to her in this same passage, she says, what do you want of me? He says, I want you to let me rest weightlessly in your soul. That's what I want. That's all I want. Because that's everything. It's more than, and it's weightless because it has no credentials. It has no name. It isn't earned. It can't be attained. It can't be lost. It's us. And when you let me rest there, it will reveal to you that place in you that's capable of letting me rest there, which is the you that I created as my beloved. And so that's where the union takes place for her and all of us. And so to sit with her and read her, so we might read her, it's true of all the mystics, and be taken by the beauty of what she says, and sit in silence and ask God to deepen our capacity to realize how the love of which she speaks is already unfolding within us, and how to be faithful to that, to carry it through the day. And I think that's the trustworthy guidance that Mechthild offers us. The three concluding thoughts. One is that when you think about it, also I think, for a poet or anyone who's deeply moved by poetry, or for any artist or anyone deeply moved by art, or by any composer or musician or performer, anyone who's moved by music, insofar as there's a rich vibrancy to their fidelity to that, or also service to a community in some way, like destiny, like a calling, like this. You realize that at the very center of it all is a kind of an invisible, quiet unfolding of some unexplainable giving of itself to you. It's pouring out, like you're being faithful to the unfolding of something of what love is asking out of you. And in your fidelity to what it asks, you're enriched, and you're channeling love through the teaching, or it might be through silence, or it might be through solitude. It might be whatever it is for you. It's engraved in your heart, and it can shift and move as you go through life. But she's always trying to bring us to the center that kind of that flows out and touches everything in all directions. So, and I think that's another, so what is that place in us, the way we put it in a previous session? See, to find that person, to find that relationship, to find that act, to find that community, which when you give yourself over to it with your whole heart, it unravels your petty preoccupation with your self-absorbed self and brings you strangely home to yourself, near your origin, like this. And so we're always learning in a little closer to so that it might flow more freely through us, whatever the modality is that we're called to, like this. Another thing I think is very helpful with her is that she's so different than Eckhart. And she's so different in the sense that Eckhart is so different from all the previous mystics we've been looking, from, not Merton, that's just me both, because Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross and Julian of Norwich were love mystics. She's a love mystic. So it's this understanding of God as love, and being transformed by infinite love into love is nuptial love mystic. But notice Eckhart doesn't talk that way. He really doesn't. Eckhart talks about a kind of a knowing and a paradoxical, and likewise, the love of the mystics is a paradoxical love, and it's the love that as we surrender to it, it unravels our inability to live on our terms. It unravels our ability to live on our terms through love, like, look what's become of me. So the knowledge of Eckhart is paradoxical knowledge. It begins with the path of detachment. It's not the acquisition of acquiring something. It's letting go of all images, all ideas of God, of everything. And the more your knowledge becomes stripped of configurations of knowledge, the birth of the word occurs like this. But the thing is, I think, two things. The path of love and the path of knowledge are modalities of being transformed by infinity into infinity. And the second point is if the emphasis is on the knowing, the love is always there. Eckhart once said, I honestly believe if we just lived by love, we wouldn't need to say any of this stuff. But likewise, if we live by love, the knowing is there. It's like the people we really know are the people we really love. And the people we really love are the people that we know. And likewise, we really know ourselves if we learn to love ourselves as we are. And if we have learned to love ourselves, we really know ourselves as God knows us, and so on. And so it's a matter of emphasis where if one language is in the forefront, the other is always there, and it can shift back and forth. But it's the commingling of these two modes of conduits that converge on the path, and I think that's a helpful distinction to make. And another thing to make is if we look at the contemplative traditions of the world religions, of all of them. So in every world religion, it has its own mystical heritage, Kabbalah, yoga, Zen, whatever it is that we can see that the nuptial mystics are much, much closer, are very, very close and resonate deeply with mystical Islam, the Sufis, Rumi and Hafiz, and so on. Rumi says, "O light that fills my room, the moth that circles you is my soul." He has a stunning love language like this, and Hafiz also, that you get the same thing. And it's also very close to Bhakti Yoga, to the Bhagavad Gita, the love path. And so we see in Bhakti Yoga, and I think also in the Sikhs, and the guru of the love poetry of the Sikh lineage, we see the emphasis of this love tradition. And the knowledge dimension is always there. It's a voice of a knowing through transformation in love. For Meister Eckhart, in this sense, and he's always closer to Buddhism, in this sense of Satori. So the Buddha, you don't hear the Buddha speaking about ecstasies, and it's not an ecstatic tradition. See, the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path is a deep knowing beyond knowing, like this. But likewise in Buddhism, the love is always there, because unless you had a love for the desire to be so awakened, you wouldn't seek it. And also the Bodhisattva. See, the Bodhisattva is the one who, having reached the final liberation, parinirvana, of Buddha nature, chooses instead to be repeatedly reborn thousands of times until all sentient beings are saved, until everyone gets through. I'm not going to go through, which is Christ. See, you see this love consciousness in the knowing, and you see the knowing. So Mechthild says, she says, love without knowledge, I forget her word, I think she used, we're lost. Knowledge without love, we're lost. See? But it's in the alchemy of this love-infused knowledge that this path of God continues. So that's my sense of her, of the tone of her and what this session is about and looking at her.
Well, I'm very excited to get into Mechthild.
Turning to the mystics will continue in a moment.
Many of us feel increasing anger at injustice, violence, and indifference in our world today. Join us March 14th for What Do I Do With My Anger? An online gathering featuring Richard Rohr and Brian McLaren. Learn ways of transforming anger into loving action. Inspired by Father Richard's new book, The Tears of Things. Register today at cac.org/anger. That's cac.org/ANGER.
What does it mean to embody salt and light? In 2025, Richard Rohr's daily meditations turn to Jesus' timeless metaphor for reflecting love into the world. Amid this season of uncertainty, join us in living with trust, being salt and light. For 18 years, the daily meditations have inspired thousands of readers like you. Subscribe today at cac.org/saltlight2025. That's cac.org/SALTLIGHT2025.
I do have some questions for you, Jim.
Sure.
One is around the worldview of the mystics. And what I love about these female mystics is that they haven't gone to seminary. They have no theological underpinnings to what they teach. And so this worldview of the mystics seems to come more out of experience than theologial understanding. And would you say that Mechthild follows the worldview of the mystics we've already studied?
I would in this sense. First of all, you look at Eckhart or these people. It's true, they have that theological knowledge. It's very interesting when John of the Cross is writing his commentary, I believe, on the Spiritual Canticle. He's dedicating it to a sister in Carmel. And he says, you won't understand this. But in the sense, you don't understand it because you've not learned theology. And he doesn't say this. You haven't learned theology because the church won't let you. You're a woman. Only men are allowed. See? And he said, but you will understand it. See, because it's love. And so what you find in these learned mystics who do have the theology, it's transconceptual knowing, rather than getting trapped in the conceptualizations. It's really conceptualizations as poetic metaphors that invite and lead us beyond a deeper way to understand what it means to understand, kind of thing. But it's really true with Mechthild, and you see it with Julian. We're going to see it with some of the others also that we're going to look at. I think that's really true. And so you can see the wisdom that shines is not a wisdom learned in the school. You don't get it out of books. By the way, the wisdom in Eckhart, he didn't get it out of books either. The wisdom, he didn't get it, but it's through the books he went beyond the books.
Yeah.
Beyond the book. And so you do see this, because Mechthild is so brilliant. It's also literature. Like, she was very gifted from the standpoint of literature, like an educated, a brilliant person, who just shines. Yeah, it's true.
And this love and knowledge that comes out of this experience of God, it's not the kind of love or knowledge that we experience in our kind of finite minds and hearts. So would you say the love, it's beyond the kind of day-to-day feeling love that we have for each other?
Yes and no. First of all, basically yes. For example, in terms of, say, an intimate love relationship, all that you know of the beloved, that you're able to put words to. Who you know the beloved to be and your love for the beloved is qualitatively beyond that. So likewise, though, there is day-by-day conceptual knowledge of nature, of the world, of science. But here's the point, and that's really true. But I think there's a sensitivity to that knowledge that you're at the cusp of something shining through. It's beyond the closure of the present definition. Does that make sense? You get the feeling it's not you haven't exhausted it by defining it. See? But in the definition, when you sit with it, it leads you on and on into layers and layers and layers and layers. And we would say eventually then, the infinity of that luring process beyond is God.
So it's interesting to me that she encourages us to read her book 9 times, because it's almost cutting through what we think we know about love, or what we think the experience of love is, to recalibrate ourselves to the kind of love she experienced in her encounter with God.
Yes, I want to talk about this for a minute, where repetition is not redundancy. See? I want to speak of it in Christian language of the liturgical year, and say, when Christmas comes, we celebrate the birth of Christ. You might say, I did that already. You got anything new back there? But like a spiral staircase, as we grow older, every time it circles around. See? So it's a non-repetitive realization of that's what I mean by incremental realizations of infinite generosity. Where there's monks at the monastery who they chant the Psalms every day, all the Psalter for the week. And they've been doing it for years. They know it by heart, a lot of them. But it isn't like, oh my God, this is so boring, I've done this. Like, got anything? What else you got back there? So it's endlessly gives itself to us. And the unfoldings of things as we stay with it. So like 9 times then, it's a kind of a very, that's what's being alluded to. So you read it once. You could read this once, cover to cover. And you could also read it, we talked about this before, you could also even read it and outline it, and comment on it, do that. And then when you're done, it might take you 2 years to get through it like that, like a practice. Take a break, and then go back and start all over again. See? And then go back and start all over again and repeat until death. See? So when you're on your deathbed, maybe someone has to read it to you. See? Very deep. See? And I think we need that call. But that very deep place we get to is already giving itself to us as the present place we've gotten to in our sensitivity, that there's infinitely more. Matter of fact, there's infinitely more than more. There's infinitely more than the most, giving itself to us and touching us right here like this. And all these mystics have that tone about them, I think.
Yes. So that theme we've had through all these mystics of how do we calibrate our hearts to kind of the presence of God that's always present with us. Mechthild, she's offering a path for that, which is to invite us into this dialogue between her and God, to kind of to recalibrate ourselves to that.
That's exactly right. And so it's like endlessness never ends. And the rehearsals for heaven, because we're going to be doing this forever, like this. And so she steps us into this path, this kind of intimate way.
Beautiful. I do remember when we were talking about the Beguines last season that in the end they were persecuted. So the Dominicans were supportive of them, but in the end they were persecuted and disbanded by the church. Is that right? Yes, because
the thing is, the Dominicans did support, like Meister Eckhart. And matter of fact, her spiritual director was a Dominican, and he's the one who encouraged her to keep writing. Yes. But the thing is, because they weren't in a religious community under a superior, and because they weren't directly answerable to, and they weren't educated, to have people claiming they could talk like this outside the clerical oversight, see? And they saw it as they needed to rein it in. And it isn't as if it wasn't subject to confusion, because it is. People, you can go off the deep end in all kinds of ways. But they, little by little by little, they actually shut down the whole thing. They just closed it down. But that's why, like the Living School is an example. It rises up, it gets shut down, and it appears somewhere else. You know what I mean? But you're right. It shows you the seduction of the church to empire, to control. And so Richard Rohr's idea of the new orthodoxy is to return to the original orthodoxy of love. See?
Which is what all these mystics are teaching us about.
That's what they're all teaching. And the contemplative reading of the Gospels is the one thing that Jesus was always teaching. It's why everything he says is like falling off a cliff. You know what I mean? You'll never get to the bottom of it because it has no bottom. It's the abyss-like welling up of God's voice in the world. And so when we sit with an open heart and hear Jesus speaking, we're there, we're in that depth dimension of daily life.
And all these mystics are grounded in the Gospels, aren't they? That was kind of their core understanding that they draw from.
Very much so. All of them, very, very much so.
Yeah. Well, I did wonder, you said sometimes she talks as God, if that was one of the reasons the church didn't like the Beguines, to have that kind of confidence.
Yes. What they didn't like is claiming a source of spiritual authority outside of the hierarchical structures. It isn't just that it isn't subject to misguidedness, because you could be. One of my rotations for my doctorate, I work on locked psychiatric units, 2 different hospitals, and there was one person on the locked psychiatric unit had religious delusions, and the person thought he was Jesus. A street person thought he was Jesus. And then another person they brought into the same unit, he thought he was Jesus. They didn't like each other. So you can go crazy, you know what I mean? Admittedly, but they felt so need to rein it in, like to watch over it and like having control over it. And it's sad. It just, it overstates. It has a worthwhile sensitivity to watch over it. But in seduction of empire, it overstates its case. Yeah.
And she also has some parts in her book where she's criticizing the church. Is that right?
Yes. Catherine Siena does this too. What she's doing, a lot of it is this lyrical love language. But then it's just like Thomas Merton in the monastery, this contemplative union with God. And then he wrote Seeds of Destruction. Dr. Martin Luther King against the Vietnam War, the nuclear war, the thing. And so what you see then is where does the mystical awakening translate itself into the justice of a response to the suffering of the world, and how it's given to you to do that. And so what she was accusing the church for was not being grounded in this love. See, she was not being, which didn't help her cause any, because another thing that she lived with is the threat of persecution or being called a heretic. But she said, I cannot not do it. I cannot not do it. And part of her integrity, I think, is that she lived with that and continued on knowing in her heart she was called to do it, and she did it. I think we're called to do that too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's very similar to Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross, who we studied, who were trying to reform the church.
Yeah. During the Inquisition. And another example of church misguidedness of the church. Exactly. Yeah. Speaking truth to power through the truth of love to power, even at the price of your own life. Thomas Merton once said, the word martyr means witness. But the martyr, and being the martyr, doesn't give up on life. The martyr bears witness to the illusion of having life. Like that. And so this love always calls us out beyond the edges, like prophetic voice. However, it's given to us to do that. And in our own way, we can be living alone. We can have that prophetic, vulnerable immediacy to us in our marriage or children or dealing with a terminal illness or teaching. It's a calling, as it gives itself to you, you seek to follow
this
it.
integrity to love.
Yeah.
It comes out of the love.
It's incarnate in this sincerity, like it's deep awakening, intimately lived, and constantly open to new insights to see what God has in mind next,
It's amazing that she could write such a big book just on one topic, on love. It does show the kind of endless nature.
That's an interesting point. It's really true. It would be true if love was a topic.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, love is a topic. You're going to get over it. I think 50 pages would do it. But the topic of love isn't love.
Yeah.
You can be well versed in the topic of love. I have this image I share sometimes. Is imagine a woman who studies God, anyone who studies God in this way, and they become so proficient. They're like a Godologist. And they write books but for all those words, it doesn't necessarily mean that they've realized this realization beyond words. Thomas Merton once said, we don't need more people to write more books on prayer. See, like you sit by the fireplace, sipping tea, writing, underlining beautiful. We don't need more people to read more books on prayer. We need people to close the books and pray. But there's books that can help us to close the books. And these mystics are one of them. The gospel is one of them. Yeah, the book of life. Yeah.
And in the book, you said we're kind of taken into a dialogue that's happening between Mechthild and God. And it started when she was 12 years old, but the dialogue continues. Is that right? It's like she's in a constant dialogue with God?
And it's also a dialogue without words. See, like in intimacy, there's a dialogue of love. And the words get so deep, the words stop. So I think all her words are like that. I think there's a union that gives birth to a word, but it's so deeply evocative, the words fall back into silence. And when we read her, we can feel that same rhythm in us. We read the word, but if it really gets to us, we don't just read the next sentence, we stop. It's like skimming over depth deprivation. I'm going to skim on to the next sentence. And what she just said is something I want to ask God to help me to taste this within myself.
Yeah, you're kind of taken somewhere for a moment in your whole out of time in a way, isn't it? That feeling
That's
of being
right.
taken out.
And there's another insight about these mystics is that there are certain words, when you're in this, you're silenced by it. So then there are certain words that break the silence because you can't bear the intimacy, whatever. But there's certain words that don't break the silence. The rhythm and cadence of the words embody the silence. So the living logos is a word, like the monks chanting the song. It's not a word that breaks the silence. And so these are the words of lovers. These are the cry of the poor, the healing voice, the voice of the poet, the voice of this. So there are certain word, the logos, the living word, that kind of is the resonance, yes.
And Jim, just looking at the book, it's a dialogue between the soul and God. Is that right?
She goes back and forth. Again, it's the lyric. She helps us get aspects of ourself. So sometimes it's between her soul and God and her soul. Sometimes it's between her soul and her body. Sometimes so she keeps moving back and forth. And so in these dialogues, like watching a play. And so what it does, it gets past linear explanatory ways of looking at these different aspects of ourselves in the presence of God.
Could you help us understand how she sees the soul, given that she does go back and forward in these ways?
Well, first of all, let's say the soul, for her, the soul, it's different levels to it. One, let's say the soul, by the soul she means the interiority of ourselves is our soul. And in the interiority of ourselves, we talked about before, the powers of the soul, the interior dimensions of knowing, the interior dimensions of memory, the interior dimensions of desire, the interior dimensions of feelings, and so on. And so these deepening dimensions of the aspect of the soul, we realize then also what the soul is then, is that it's the sense of the self being created by God in the image and likeness of God is the soul. So the soul is the medium through which, or the experiential immediacy of realizing the beloved, that we are created by God in the image and likeness of God is the soul. And I think she also means by the soul, Teresa puts it this way also, that if we think of heaven as where God lives, and since we know God is within us, our soul is God's heaven, see? And God's waiting for us there. See, like we're trapped on the outer circumference of the interiority of our own soul, in which God, whom the whole world cannot contain, is waiting for us in the inwardness, see, that causes us to express this love. That's the way it helps me to understand it.
Oh, that's really helpful. One last question. I wonder for you, Jim, what it's like to approach a mystic you're not as familiar with. So for us listening to the podcast, this is probably the first time we've heard this mystic, but we may have listened to other seasons and have a sense of the mystic. So how do you approach a new, well, not new for you, but a mystic you're not as familiar with?
This is my sense of it. I'll give an example that comes to me. I saw a video, Isaac Perlman, the violinist, and he was teaching Juilliard. He was teaching gifted students, mentoring them one-on-one. And so he would say to the student, play this. There would be like Mozart or Brahms, whatever, and the student would play it. And he says, see this phrasing right here, like this? He said, do it a little more like this. And so he listens. So part of the student's ability as a gifted student, the student can follow that. See? That's what makes them gifted. But there's something else he's listening for. See? He's listening for the call note, like Rilke says, of the flowing of a beauty that transcends the one playing it. And it's flowing through this person, and he recognizes it. See? And therefore, it's like a contemplation recognizes itself. So when you pick up a new mystic, that particular mystic's new. But as soon as they strike that chord, incarnate infinity intimately realized, you're already familiar with who they are. And that can be also to another religion. You can also sit and open, this with Merton, you can open the sutras or whatever it is. There's some poets too, you can pick up, they reach that, it's a certain intimate immediacy of unsayable things, and it rings true. That's my sense of it.
That's really helpful because, as you say, she doesn't outline a path, so we're not going to be giving a lot of tools or guidance. She doesn't offer the kind of tools or guidance that we've had in previous seasons, but this way of being open to the...
I want to say something also too. Let's say there's a certain order, like Teresa with the 7 mansions, 7 degrees, that's there. St. John of the Cross, it talks about journeying to God through a passage through a dark night. Then there's the night of the senses, the appetites, the active night and the passive night. We choose, passively it happens to us, actively we cooperate with it. Then the night of the spirit happens to us, we cooperate with it. And then we can look at how it goes through these stages, in a way. And the cloud of unknowing, Lectio, meditation and prayer, which then opens out upon it and prepares for contemplation and so on. And but here's the thing, really. It's an order properly followed that transcends the order. Mm-hmm. So it isn't like you do the 4 Noble Truths of the Buddha, got that one nailed, check it off. Or 12 steps of sobriety. I think I got the first step covered. I'll move on. I'm ready for the second one. You never finish the first one. You never finish. And so the Gospels, so there's a certain order that's in the exercises of Ignatius too, on visualizing images of Jesus and so on. There's a certain order that helps maintain and lead us to this point of overflow, like this. But then there's certain people like her, there is no order. But at an underlying order, it's love's order. It isn't chaos. But I mean, anyways, exactly.
That's lovely. So we can just relax and open our hearts to the love she might be resonating with.
That's exactly right. And know as we read her, she's really helping us to surrender to a love that's already begun. Otherwise, we wouldn't be touched by the teachings of the mystics.
Yeah, I was going to say that. We're already on the path.
We're already on the path.
If we're listening to this, yeah.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah. And Jim, you've enjoyed coming back to her for this season?
Very much so. I've been sitting with her a lot, really outlining her and just trying to put words to it and paraphrasing it. It's been a real gift for me. She's so beautiful and poignant, beautiful.
Well, thank you so much for sharing her with us and looking forward to the season ahead. And we did just want to let people know about the book we're using.
Yes.
So it's Mechthild of Magdeburg, The Flowing Light of the Godhead, translated and introduced by Frank Tobin, and it's from Paulist Press.
And it's part of the Classics of Western Spirituality series of Paulist Press. They did a beautiful job of putting out these classical works. And so it's in that series. So that's what we're using.
Okay, wonderful. And you're probably using an older version than most of us will get, but
well, I think I might be using an older edition.
Yes, an older
but I don't
edition.
think they changed it.
Okay.
Mine is, yeah, it probably is. I've had it for quite a while.
Looks well worn. Wonderful. Okay, well, thank you for this wonderful introduction, Jim, and look forward to this season. Thank you for listening to this episode of Turning to the Mystics, a podcast created by the Centre for Action and Contemplation. We're planning to do episodes that answer your questions. So if you have a question, please email us at podcasts@cac.org or send us a voicemail. All of this information can be found in the show notes. We'll see you again soon.
Do you feel called to walk a more contemplative path? The Center for Action and Contemplation is an educational nonprofit supporting the journey of inner transformation. Our programs and resources will help grow your consciousness, deepen your prayer practice, and strengthen your compassionate engagement with the world. Learn more about our resources, such as publications, podcasts, email series, and events at www.cac.org.